They found her face down in the snow outside the courthouse, clutching an eviction notice in her frozen fingers. The good people of Red Hollow stepped right over her, some laughing, some spitting. They called her dangerous, unnatural, a plague on decent folk. What they didn't know was that Martha Reed was about to walk straight into hell itself. A cursed ranch, 2 daughters who'd driven off every woman before her, and a mountain that killed the weak. But here's the thing about people the world throws away. Sometimes they're the only ones strong enough to survive what's coming. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Martha's story travels. The storm hit Red Hollow like a fist. Martha Reed felt the first snowflake land on her cheek as she stood outside Thornton's General Store, her empty flour sack clutched against her chest. The wind came next, sharp enough to cut through her worn coat and the layers of wool underneath. She'd walked 3 miles into town that morning, 3 miles on roads that were already turning to ice. The store door opened behind her, and she heard the laughter spill out. Lord have mercy, look at the size of her. Shouldn't be allowed out in public like that. Husband's been dead 2 years, and she still eats like he's coming home for supper. Martha's hands tightened on the sack. She didn't turn around. Turning around meant seeing their faces, and she'd learned that seeing their faces only made the shame sit heavier in her chest. The voices belonged to Ruth Garrett and Susan Miller, women she'd known since childhood, women who'd brought casseroles to Samuel's funeral and then stopped speaking to her 3 weeks later. The door slammed shut. The laughter cut off. Martha started walking. The courthouse sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story brick building with white columns that the town council had erected 15 years ago to prove Red Hollow was civilized. Martha had always thought it looked out of place, like someone had dropped a piece of Boston into the Montana frontier and expected it to take root. She wasn't supposed to be here today. The notice had come yesterday, hand-delivered by Deputy Morrison, who wouldn't meet her eyes when he passed her the envelope. She'd read it 3 times before the words made sense. Eviction proceedings. Failure to pay property taxes. 30 days to vacate. 30 days. Samuel had owned that house outright. Paid for it with money he'd saved working the copper mines before his lungs gave out. But the taxes had piled up after he died, and Martha's sewing work barely kept her fed, let alone caught up on county debts. The wind picked up. Snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that stuck to her eyelashes and melted on her lips. Her boots slipped on the icy boardwalk. She caught herself on a hitching post, felt the rough wood bite into her palm. Someone was watching her from across the street. She could feel their eyes. She kept walking. The courthouse steps were covered in fresh snow. Martha climbed them slowly, one hand on the rail, her knees protesting with each step. The weight she carried wasn't just in her body. It was in her bones, in the tired ache that came from 2 years of sleeping alone in a cold house and waking up to a world that had decided she didn't matter anymore. The door was heavy. She had to lean her full weight against it to push it open. Inside, the courthouse was warm. Too warm. The heat from the potbelly stove in the corner hit her like a wall, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her coat was suddenly suffocating. Sweat prickled at her hairline. "Help you?" The clerk sat behind a tall desk, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He didn't look up from his ledger. "I'm here about the eviction notice," Martha said. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Name?" "Martha Reed." Now he looked up. His eyes traveled from her face down to her body and back up again. The judgment was quick, efficient, practiced. "You're 3 months behind, Mrs. Reed. Nothing I can do." "I have some money." She pulled a small cloth purse from her coat pocket. "It's not all of it, but I can get the rest. I just need more time. Can't accept partial payment, county policy." "Please." The words scraped out of her throat. "I've lived in that house for 12 years. My husband built the front porch with his own hands. I just need—" "Policy is policy, ma'am." The door behind her opened. Cold air rushed in, and with it came voices. Martha turned and saw them. Ruth Garrett, Susan Miller, and 3 other women from the church auxiliary. They stopped when they saw her, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Ruth's eyes narrowed. "Martha." "Ruth." "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same." Susan stepped forward, her face arranged in an expression of exaggerated concern. "We heard about your trouble, Martha. Such a shame. But you have to understand, a woman living alone like that, it's just not proper. I'm not asking for your approval, Susan. No, but you're asking the county for mercy, aren't you? Ruth's voice was sharp now, the false sweetness gone. Funny how that works. You spend 2 years shut up in that house, refusing decent company, turning your nose up at church socials, and now you want help. Martha felt something cold settle in her stomach. I never refused anything. You refused Jacob Tully when he offered to court you. Jacob Tully is 63 years old and smells like whiskey. He's a property owner, respectable, but I suppose you think you're too good for him. The clerk cleared his throat. Ladies, if you could take this outside, we're leaving, Ruth said. She looked at Martha one more time and her voice dropped to something quiet and vicious. You should leave too, Martha. This town doesn't need your kind anymore. They walked out. Their skirts rustled. The door slammed. Martha stood very still. Mrs. Reed? The clerk's voice was gentler now, almost apologetic. I really can't help you. I'm sorry. She nodded, turned, walked back toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when the dizziness hit. The room tilted. The warm air pressed down on her chest like a physical weight. She'd skipped breakfast this morning, couldn't afford to waste food when she didn't know where the next meal was coming from, and the walk into town had taken more out of her than she'd realized. She tried to push the door open. Her arm wouldn't cooperate. Mrs. Reed? The floor came up to meet her. She remembered the cold, the snow against her face, the sound of voices, distant and distorted, like she was hearing them from underwater. Then nothing. When Martha opened her eyes, she was staring at a wooden ceiling beam. The wood was dark, rough-hewn, unfamiliar. This wasn't her house. The ceiling in her bedroom had a water stain shaped like Ohio. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her head, and she fell back against the pillow. Easy now. The voice came from her left. She turned her head, slowly this time, and saw a man sitting in a chair beside the bed. He was maybe 45, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and left out in the weather too long. His hands were rough, scarred across the knuckles. Who are you? Martha's throat was dry. Elias Ward. The name meant nothing to her. He must have seen the confusion on her face because he continued, You collapsed outside the courthouse. Been out for about 2 hours. Doc Harrison checked you over. Said you were half frozen and hadn't eaten in too long. I brought you to the boarding house. Why? The question seemed to surprise him. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. Didn't seem right, leaving you in the snow. Martha closed her eyes. The shame was back, hot and familiar. Everyone else did. I noticed. Silence settled between them. Martha could hear voices downstairs. The boarding house keeper probably, and whoever else was staying here. The wind rattled the window. The storm was getting worse. You got people? Elias asked. Someone who can take you home? No. No family? Dead husband. No children. The words came out flat, factual. She'd said them so many times in the past 2 years that they'd lost their sting. Elias nodded slowly. The eviction notice. That was yours? Her eyes snapped open. You read my mail. It was sticking out of your coat pocket. He didn't look apologetic. You got anywhere to go? Not your concern. Maybe not, but I'm asking anyway. Martha pushed herself up on her elbows. The room spun for a second, then steadied. Why do you care? I got a proposition. I'm not interested in... Not that kind of proposition. His voice was hard. I got a ranch 40 miles north in the mountains. 2 daughters. The youngest is 8, the oldest is 14. Their mother died 3 years ago, and I haven't been able to keep a housekeeper longer than 2 months since. What happened to them? The housekeepers? Elias's mouth twitched, almost a smile. My daughters happened to them. Nora, that's the oldest, she's got a talent for making women quit. Last one left after Nora put a snake in her bed. One before that found all her dresses cut to ribbons. And you think I'd want this job because you got nowhere else to go, and I'm desperate enough to hire someone the town's already thrown away. He said it plainly, without cruelty, but the truth of it still landed like a slap. Martha sat up fully now. Her head throbbed, but she ignored it. How much? Room, board, and $30 a month. It was more than she made sewing, more than she'd make in 3 months of piecework. There's a catch, she said. Several. The ranch is isolated. Snow's coming in heavy this year. You'd be snowed in from November to March, most likely. The house is old, drafty, and my daughters will make your life hell for at least the first few weeks, maybe longer. Why me? Elias stood up. He was tall, taller than Samuel had been, and there was something solid about him, like he was built from the same mountains where his ranch sat. Because every other woman who's come up that mountain has run back down it crying, and you look like someone who doesn't run. Martha stared at him. The room was quiet, except for the wind and the distant murmur of voices downstairs. I need to think about it, she said. Fair enough. I'm leaving tomorrow at dawn. You want the job? Be at the livery stable by first light. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, Mrs. Reed, I'm sorry about what happened out there. Town like this, people forget how to be decent. They didn't forget, Martha said quietly. They just decided I wasn't worth the effort. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and left. Martha didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow boarding house bed and listened to the storm rage outside. The wind howled. Snow pelted against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. She thought about her house. The front porch Samuel built. The kitchen where she'd learned to make bread that actually rose instead of sitting in the pan like a brick. The bedroom where Samuel had died, his hand in hers, his lungs too scarred to pull in one more breath. She thought about Ruth Garrett's face. This town doesn't need your kind anymore. What was her kind? Widowed, heavy, alone, unwanted. She'd spent 2 years trying to be small enough, quiet enough, acceptable enough that Red Hollow would let her exist. And it hadn't mattered. They'd decided she was dangerous, not because of anything she'd done, but because she was a woman without a man, and that made her a threat to the careful order they'd built. The eviction notice was just the final nail. Martha rolled onto her side. Her body ached, not just from the fall, but from everything. From carrying weight the world told her was shameful, from working until her fingers bled to earn pennies, from the loneliness that sat in her chest like a stone. 2 daughters. Isolated ranch, mountains. It sounded like exile, but exile was better than erasure. At 4 a.m, Martha got out of bed. She packed her few belongings into the carpet bag she'd brought with her. 2 dresses, a spare pair of stockings, a wooden comb that had been her mother's, and the small leather pouch Samuel had given her the day before he died. She'd never opened the pouch. Couldn't bring herself to. Opening it would mean accepting that he was really gone, that whatever he'd saved for her was all she had left. She tucked it into the bottom of the bag and buckled the straps. Dawn was still an hour away when she left the boarding house. The storm had passed, leaving Red Hollow buried under a foot of fresh snow. The streets were empty, silent. Martha walked toward the livery stable. Her feet left deep prints in the snow. Behind her, the courthouse stood dark and cold, its white columns like teeth in the pre-dawn light. She didn't look back. Elias Ward was already at the livery when she arrived. He stood beside a wagon loaded with supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, bolts of fabric. 2 horses were hitched to the front, their breath steaming in the cold air. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Didn't think you'd come, he said. Neither did I. Change your mind? Not yet. He nodded, held out his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. Martha hesitated. She wasn't used to men offering her help anymore. Wasn't used to anyone offering her anything except judgment. She took his hand. His grip was strong, steady. He didn't flinch at her weight. She settled onto the seat. Elias climbed up beside her and took the reins. It's a 2-day ride, he said. We'll stop at the way station tonight. Gets rough after that. Mountain roads aren't forgiving. I'm not looking for forgiveness. Elias glanced at her. The corner of his mouth twitched. Good. Because you won't find much of it where we're going. He clicked his tongue. The horses started forward. Red Hollow fell away behind them. The first day of riding was long and cold and miserable. The road north was barely a road at all, more like a suggestion of a path carved through the wilderness by people who'd given up on civilization. Snow had drifted across it in places, forcing Elias to guide the horses carefully around hidden rocks and frozen ruts. Martha had never been this far from Red Hollow. The farthest she'd traveled was Miles City, once, when Samuel needed to see a doctor. But this was different. This was leaving behind everything she'd known. The town where she'd been born, the house where she'd become a wife and then a widow, the graves in the churchyard where her parents and Samuel were buried. She thought she'd feel more about that. Sadness, maybe. Regret? Instead, she felt nothing. Just cold. "You always this quiet?" Elias asked around noon. They'd stopped to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of bread and dried meat. "You always this talkative?" Martha shot back. He huffed, almost a laugh. Fair point. They ate in silence. Martha watched the landscape roll past. The flatlands were giving way to foothills now, the ground rising in gentle swells that would eventually become mountains. Pine trees appeared, dark green against the white snow. "Your daughters," Martha said. "Tell me about them." Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was choosing each word. "Nora's 14. Looks like her mother. Same dark hair, same temper. She's been angry since the day Caroline died. Takes it out on anyone who gets close." "And the younger one?" "Elsie." His voice softened. "She's 8. Hasn't spoken since we buried her mother." Martha looked at him. "Not a word?" "Not one. You take her to a doctor?" "3 of them. They all said the same thing. Nothing wrong with her throat or her tongue. It's in her mind, they said. She'll talk when she's ready. 3 years is a long time to wait." "I know." Martha thought about that. A child locked in silence for 3 years. A teenage girl turning violence on anyone who tried to replace her mother. A man desperate enough to hire a stranger. This wasn't a job. This was a battlefield. "Why are you really hiring me?" she asked. Elias looked at her. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds. "Because I'm out of options. Every woman I've hired has been thin, pretty, proper. The kind of woman who'd look right in a ranch house. They all ran. So maybe what I need isn't someone who looks right. Maybe I need someone who's already survived worse than my daughters can throw at her." "You think being poor and fat makes me tougher?" "I think being thrown away and still standing makes you tougher." Martha had no answer for that. They climbed back onto the wagon and kept riding. The way station appeared just after sunset. A squat log building hunched against the base of a foothill, like it was trying to hide from the wind. Smoke curled from the chimney. Light glowed in the windows. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the hitching post. "We'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we head into the mountains proper." Inside, the way station was crowded and loud. A dozen people packed the main room, trappers, prospectors, a family heading west, 2 men who looked like they'd been mining for 20 years and hadn't struck gold once. They all stopped talking when Martha walked in. She felt their eyes, felt the familiar weight of their judgment. Elias moved past her to the bar. 2 rooms, 2 meals. The station keeper, Smee, a woman with gray hair and hard eyes, looked from Elias to Martha and back again. "That'll be $4. "Seems high. Prices go up in winter." Elias paid. The keeper handed him 2 keys. They ate at a corner table, beans and salt pork and bread that tasted like sawdust. Martha ate anyway. She'd learned not to waste food. "They're staring," she said quietly. "Let them." "Doesn't bother you?" "I stopped caring what people think a long time ago." Martha wanted to ask when. Wanted to know what had happened to make him stop caring, but before she could, a man approached their table. He was young, maybe 25, and with a patchy beard and nervous hands. "You heading up to the Ward place?" Elias looked up. "Why?" "Just, folks say it's cursed, say bad things happen up there." "Folks say a lot of things. My cousin worked for you last summer. She left after 2 weeks. Wouldn't talk about it, but she was scared. Real scared. Your cousin put her hand in a hornet's nest trying to steal honey from my barn. She left because she's an idiot." The young man's face flushed red. "You calling my family?" "I'm calling your cousin an idiot. Now get away from my table." The man hesitated. For a second, Martha thought he might swing, but something in Elias's face made him think better of it. He backed away, muttering. Elias went back to his food like nothing had happened. "Does that happen often?" Martha asked. "The cursed house talk?" "Every time I come to town." Is it true? Is the house cursed? Elias smiled, but there was no humor in it. Depends on what you believe. Caroline died giving birth to our son. The baby died too. Some people think that means the land's poisoned. Others think I'm being punished for something. What do you think? I think my wife had a difficult pregnancy and the nearest doctor was 40 miles away. I think bad luck isn't the same as a curse. He pushed his plate away. But people need their stories. Makes them feel better about their own lives when they can point to someone worse off. Martha knew that feeling. She'd been the subject of Red Hollow's stories for 2 years. They finished eating in silence and went upstairs to their rooms. Martha's room was small, barely big enough for the narrow bed and washstand. She sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots. Her feet were swollen, her legs aching from the long day in the wagon. She thought about tomorrow, about the mountains, about 2 girls who would hate her on sight. She thought about turning back. But where would she go? Red Hollow was behind her, literally and figuratively. She had no money, no home, no future there. The only direction left was forward. Martha lay down without undressing. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of snow and empty houses and a silence so deep it felt like drowning. The mountains were worse than Martha imagined. The road, if you could even call it a road, wound up through passes so narrow the wagon wheels scraped against rock on both sides. The horses struggled, their hooves slipping on patches of ice. Twice they had to stop while Elias cleared fallen branches from the path. The trees grew thicker as they climbed, pines so tall they blocked out the sun. The temperature dropped. Martha's breath came out in white clouds. How much farther? She asked around midday. 4 more hours, maybe 5. Martha's back ached. Her hands were numb despite the gloves Elias had given her. You could have warned me it was this bad, she said. Would you have come if I did? No. That's why I didn't warn you. They kept climbing. The sun was starting to set when they finally crested a ridge and Martha saw the ranch for the first time. It sat in a valley surrounded by peaks on 3 sides. The house was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, built from rough timber that had weathered to gray. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond that she could see fences marking off pasture land, though there were no cattle in sight. Smoke rose from the chimney. There it is, Elias said. Home. The word sounded wrong. This didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress, a place people came to hide from the world. They descended into the valley. As they got closer, Martha could see the details. Broken shutters on one of the upstairs windows, firewood stacked haphazardly against the side of the house, a wagon wheel leaning against the barn with half its spokes missing. This place wasn't just isolated. It was barely holding together. The front door opened before they reached the house. A girl stood in the doorway. 14, Elias had said, and Martha could see it in the way she held herself, caught between childhood and something harder. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, and eyes that looked black in the fading light. Nora. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop. Nora, where's your sister? Inside. The girl's voice was flat, emotionless. This is Mrs. Reed. She'll be working here. Nora's eyes traveled over Martha slowly, deliberately, taking in every inch of her. The judgment was instant and complete. Another one? Nora said. How long do you think this one will last? That's enough. A week, 2 weeks. Nora smiled, and it was the coldest thing Martha had ever seen on a child's face. I give her 3 days. I said that's enough. But Nora wasn't looking at her father anymore. She was looking at Martha, and her smile widened. Welcome to hell, Mrs. Reed. Then she turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open behind her. Elias climbed down from the wagon. I'm sorry about that. Martha was still staring at the open door, at the darkness inside. Don't be, she said quietly. I've been through worse. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. She'd survived poverty, widowhood, public humiliation. But this? 2 daughters, isolated mountains, a house that felt wrong even from the outside. Martha climbed down from the wagon, her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. Elias caught her elbow. You all right? Fine. You're not fine, you're exhausted. I said I'm fine. He let go of her arm. Stubborn. You have no idea. Martha picked up her carpet bag and walked toward the house. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but she kept walking. The door was still open. Light spilled out onto the snow. Martha stepped inside. The house was cold, not just temperature cold, but empty cold. The kind of cold that comes from years of grief soaked into the walls. The main room was large. A kitchen on one side, a sitting area on the other, a staircase leading up to the second floor. The furniture was sparse, functional. No decorations, no warmth. A fire burned in the hearth, but it didn't help. Nora stood by the stairs, arms crossed, and beside her, half hidden in shadow, was a smaller figure. Elsie. The girl was tiny, too thin, with pale skin and hair the color of wheat. She stared at Martha with wide eyes, but didn't make a sound. "Elsie," Elias said gently, "this is Mrs. Reed. She's going to be staying with us." The girl didn't move, didn't blink. "Say hello, Elsie," Nora said. Her voice was mocking. "Oh, wait, you can't." Nora, it's true, isn't it? She can't talk, and you can't fix her. So you keep bringing strangers into our house, hoping one of them will work a miracle. Nora's voice rose. "But miracles don't exist, Father. Mother's dead, the baby's dead, and no fat widow from town is going to change that." The words hit like stones. Elias's face went white. "Go to your room." "Why? So you can pretend this will work? So you can—" "Now!" Nora flinched. For just a second, the hard mask slipped, and Martha saw the girl underneath, scared, grieving, barely holding on. Then the mask came back. Nora turned and ran up the stairs. A door slammed. Silence. Elsie was still standing there, staring at Martha. Her expression hadn't changed. Martha knelt down slowly, ignoring the protest from her knees. She met the girl's eyes. "Hello, Elsie," she said quietly. "I know you don't want me here. I wouldn't want me here either, but I don't have anywhere else to go, and your father was kind enough to give me a chance. So I'm going to stay, and I'm not going to try to fix you because you're not broken. You understand?" Elsie blinked. Once. Twice. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the back of the house. Martha stood up. Her knees popped. Her back ached. Elias was watching her. That was different. What was? Every other woman who's come here tried to hug her, tried to make her talk. You didn't. Because it's not about me. It's about her. Martha looked around the cold, empty house. "Where do I sleep?" "Upstairs, second door on the left." Martha picked up her bag and headed for the stairs. Behind her, Elias spoke. "Mrs. Reed?" She stopped. "Thank you. For coming." Martha didn't turn around. "Ask me again in a week. See if you're still grateful." She climbed the stairs and found her room. It was small. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the valley. The floorboards creaked. The walls were bare. Martha sat down on the bed. It groaned under her weight. Through the wall, she could hear Nora crying. And downstairs, Elias moving around the kitchen, his footsteps heavy and tired. And somewhere in the house, Elsie's silence, thick and impenetrable. Martha closed her eyes. What have I done? But it was too late to ask that question. She was here now, and the only way out was through. Martha woke to the sound of something breaking. She sat up in the dark, her heart hammering. The room was freezing. She could see her breath in the air. Downstairs, glass shattered against wood, then silence. She fumbled for the matches on the bedside table, lit the oil lamp. The clock showed 4:30 in the morning. More sounds from below. Footsteps. The scrape of something being dragged across the floor. Martha pulled on her dress, not bothering with all the buttons, and opened her door. The hallway was dark, except for a faint glow coming from downstairs. She moved toward the stairs, her hand on the wall for balance. Halfway down, she saw them. Nora stood in the kitchen, fully dressed, yanking pots and pans from the cupboards and dropping them onto the floor. Each one landed with a crash that echoed through the house. Elsie sat at the table, watching. She was in her nightgown, her feet bare, her face expressionless. "What are you doing?" Martha asked. Nora didn't look up. "Making breakfast. At 4:30 in the morning, Father gets up at 5. Someone has to feed him." Another pot hit the floor. "But I suppose you think that's your job now." Martha came down the rest of the stairs. Her feet were bare too, and the floor was ice cold. Where is your father? Barn, tending the horses. And you always make this much noise? Only when we have guests. Nora finally looked at her and her smile was sharp. Did we wake you? I'm so sorry. Martha crossed to the stove. The fire had gone out overnight. She opened the door and saw nothing but cold ash. You let the fire die, she said. Did I? Nora's voice was all fake innocence. How clumsy of me. Martha looked at Elsie. The girl was still watching, still silent. Her hands were folded in her lap, and Martha noticed for the first time how thin her wrists were, like bird bones. When did you eat last? Martha asked her. Elsie didn't answer, just stared. She doesn't talk, remember? Nora said. Might as well save your breath. Martha ignored her. She knelt in front of the stove and started rebuilding the fire. The kindling was damp. Someone had left the wood box too close to the door, and snow had blown in during the night. It took her 10 minutes to get a flame going. Behind her, Nora kept dropping things. A skillet, a wooden spoon, a tin cup that rolled across the floor and hit Martha's foot. Martha didn't react, just kept working. When the fire was crackling, she stood up and surveyed the kitchen. It was a mess, not just from Nora's tantrum, but from weeks, maybe months of neglect. Dirty dishes were stacked in the wash basin. The floor needed sweeping. The walls were spotted with grease. But the pantry was well stocked. She found flour, cornmeal, dried apples, a jar of honey, eggs packed in salt. Where's the bacon? She asked. We don't have any, Nora said. I saw it in the wagon yesterday. We don't have any. Martha turned around. Nora was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, her expression daring Martha to argue. Fine, Martha said. Eggs it is. She worked quickly, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because her hands needed something to do. She made cornmeal mush with honey and dried apples stirred in, scrambled eggs with wild onions she found hanging in the pantry, and strong coffee that filled the kitchen with a smell that actually felt warm. Nora watched the whole time, waiting, expecting something. Martha could feel the girl's eyes on her back. When the food was ready, Martha set 3 plates on the table. Elsie hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, like a doll someone had placed in a chair and forgotten. Eat, Martha said. Elsie looked down at the plate, then up at Martha, then at Nora. You don't have to, Nora said quickly. She's not Mother. She can't tell us what to do. I'm not telling you to do anything, Martha said. I'm offering you food. You can take it or leave it. She fixed her own plate and sat down. Her chair creaked alarmingly. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Elsie picked up her spoon. Slowly, carefully, she took a bite of the mush. Chewed. Swallowed. Nora's face went red. Elsie? But Elsie kept eating. Small bites, methodical, her eyes on her plate. Nora stared at her sister like she'd been betrayed. Then she grabbed her coat from the hook by the door and stormed out into the dark. The door slammed. Martha and Elsie sat in silence. Martha ate her breakfast and tried not to look at the girl too directly. She'd learned that with frightened animals, direct eye contact made them bolt. After a few minutes, Elsie pushed her plate away. She'd eaten maybe a third of it. Not hungry? Martha asked. Elsie shook her head. All right, you can go if you want. The girl slid off her chair and padded toward the stairs. But halfway there she stopped, turned around, looked at Martha with those wide, pale eyes. Martha waited. Elsie's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Then she turned and ran up the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the wood. Martha sat alone in the kitchen, drinking her coffee, watching the sky lighten outside the window. The door opened. Elias came in, stamping snow from his boots. He stopped when he saw the table. You cooked. Someone had to. He looked at the 2 empty plates. The girls ate? Elsie did. Nora's outside somewhere, probably freezing out of spite. Elias almost smiled. Sounds about right. He hung his coat and sat down. Martha poured him coffee. She broke half your dishes, Martha said. I know. And let the fire go out. I know. And stole the bacon. Probably buried it in the snow. Elias picked up his fork. She does that. Hides things. Food, clothes, tools. Found my good hammer in the hen house last month. You let her get away with it? Didn't say that. Said I know about it. He took a bite of eggs, and something in his face shifted. These are good. They're eggs. First decent meal I've had in 6 months. They ate in silence. Outside, the sun was rising, turning the snow-covered valley pink and gold. It was beautiful in a harsh, indifferent way, the kind of beauty that didn't care if you appreciated it or not. Your wife, Martha said. How long were you married? Elias set down his fork. 16 years. You loved her? Yes. The girls loved her too. Yes. Martha looked at him. Then you need to stop expecting them to forget her. Elias's jaw tightened. I'm not asking them to forget. You're asking them to let someone else take her place. That's the same thing to them. So what am I supposed to do? Let the house fall apart? Let them run wild? I don't know, Martha said honestly. But hiring a new woman every 2 months and acting surprised when they hate her isn't working. Elias stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, took his plate to the wash basin, and walked out without another word. Martha sat alone again, finishing her coffee. Through the window, she could see Nora emerging from the barn. The girl's face was red from cold, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. She saw her father crossing the yard and changed direction, avoiding him. This family, Martha thought, was a collection of people living in the same house but worlds apart. She'd signed up for a job, but she was starting to realize the job wasn't cooking and cleaning, it was surviving. The next 3 days were a war of attrition. Nora hid Martha's shoes. Martha walked barefoot. Nora dumped salt in the sugar jar. Martha tasted everything before serving it. Nora locked Martha's bedroom door from the outside. Martha climbed out the window and came in through the kitchen. Every attack was met with silence. Martha didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't even acknowledge the sabotage. She just kept working. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees until the boards were clean enough to see the grain. She washed every dish in the house, mended the curtains that were coming apart at the seams, aired out the bedrooms, and reorganized the pantry. The house fought her. The wood was warped, the windows stuck, the floors uneven. But Martha had spent 2 years keeping her own falling-apart house livable. She knew how to coax cooperation from stubborn things. Elsie watched her constantly. The girl would appear in doorways, silent as smoke, and stare while Martha worked. Sometimes she'd sit at the kitchen table and draw pictures in the dust with her finger. Sometimes she'd follow Martha from room to room, always staying just out of reach. Martha talked to her anyway. Not constantly. That would have been cruel, but in small doses. I'm going to make bread today. My mother taught me when I was about your age. Took me a year to get it right. This house is older than it looks. See these beams? Someone cut these by hand, probably took all winter. Your father said you liked apples. I found some dried ones in the pantry. We can make a pie if you want. Elsie never answered, but she listened. On the 4th day, Martha woke to find all of her clothes missing. Every single piece. Dresses, undergarments, stockings, her spare boots, gone. She stood in her room in her nightgown, staring at the empty pegs on the wall. This was different from the other pranks. This was calculated, humiliating. Martha wrapped a blanket around herself and went downstairs. Nora was sitting at the kitchen table, eating bread and honey. She looked up when Martha appeared, and her eyes went wide with mock surprise. Oh no, did something happen to your clothes? Where are they? I have no idea what you're talking about. Martha walked to the stove and started making coffee. The blanket dragged on the floor. She could feel Nora watching her, waiting for the explosion. It didn't come. Martha made her coffee, drank it standing up. Then she went back upstairs, stripped the sheet off her bed, and wrapped it around herself like a toga. She came back down and started making breakfast. Nora's smile faltered. What are you doing? Making oatmeal. In a bedsheet? You took my clothes. This is what's left. You're not going to wear that all day. Why not? Because... Nora stopped. Her face was turning red. Because you look ridiculous. I've looked ridiculous my whole life. I'm used to it. Martha set the oatmeal on the table. Elsie had appeared in the doorway, staring at Martha's improvised dress. Elsie, breakfast, Martha said. The girl sat down. Her eyes never left the bedsheet. Nora was standing now, her hands balled into fists. You're supposed to be angry. Why? Because I took your clothes. I know. So get angry. Yell at me. Tell father. Martha looked at her, really looked at her, saw the desperation under the rage. This girl didn't just want to win, she needed to provoke a reaction, needed proof that she could still make people feel something. No, Martha said quietly. Why not? Because you want me to, and I'm tired of doing what people expect. She sat down and started eating. After a moment, Elsie did too. Nora stood there trembling. Then she grabbed her coat and ran outside. Martha wore the bedsheet all morning. She cooked lunch in it, swept the floors in it, washed dishes in it. Elias came in around noon, saw her, stopped in his tracks. Don't ask, Martha said. Wasn't going to. My clothes will turn up eventually. They always do. He paused. You're handling this better than the others. The others probably had somewhere else to go. Elias poured himself a coffee. You could leave. I'd pay you for the week, give you a horse, help you get back to town. Is that what you want? I want my daughters to have a stable home, but I won't keep you prisoner here. Martha looked out the window. Nora was in the yard throwing snowballs at the barn wall with vicious accuracy. She's testing me, Martha said, trying to find the breaking point. If I leave now, she learns that she can drive anyone away. And then what? You hire someone else? She does it again? So what's the alternative? I don't break. That afternoon, Martha found her clothes in the hen house, stuffed inside nesting boxes and covered in straw and worse things. She carried them to the wash basin and scrubbed them clean, then hung them by the fire to dry. Nora watched from the stairs. Satisfied? She asked. Not particularly, Martha said. You should be. You won. This isn't a game I'm trying to win. Then what do you want? Martha wrung out a stocking. A place to sleep, food to eat, maybe a little peace. You won't find peace here. I haven't found it anywhere else either. At least here I'm useful. Nora came down a few steps. The last woman who came here, she cried every night. I could hear her through the wall. What did you do to her? Didn't have to do anything. The house did it for me. Nora's voice dropped. This place eats people. It ate Mother. It'll eat you too. Maybe, Martha said. Or maybe I'm too tough to chew. Something flickered across Nora's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Then she turned and went back upstairs. 2 weeks in, the snow came. Not the light dustings Martha had seen in Red Hollow, but a blizzard that buried the valley in white. It started in the afternoon and didn't stop for 3 days. The wind howled so loud it drowned out thought. Snow drifted against the windows, piled halfway up the barn door, turned the world into nothing but white and cold and noise. They were trapped inside. Elias spent most of his time in the barn, checking on the horses and the few cattle they'd brought in from the pastures. He'd come in for meals, snow-covered and silent, eat quickly, and go back out, which left Martha alone with the girls. Nora had gone quiet. The pranks had stopped, but so had the talking. She sat by the window for hours, staring out at the storm, her face blank. Elsie drew pictures in the frost on the window panes. Horses, trees. A woman who might have been her mother. On the second day, Martha started baking. She'd found a recipe in the pantry, tucked inside a tin of tea, written in faded ink on yellowed paper. The handwriting was careful, feminine. Caroline's probably. Apple cake with cinnamon and honey. Martha mixed the batter, poured it into a pan, and put it in the oven. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet, and so at odds with the howling outside that it felt like magic. Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway. What are you making? Cake. Why? Because I'm bored, and we have apples that need using. Nora stepped closer. That's Mother's recipe. I know. You shouldn't use it. Why not? Because it's hers. Martha pulled the cake from the oven. It had risen perfectly, golden brown on top. Your mother's gone. The recipe isn't. Seems like a waste to let it sit in a tin forever. Everything in this house was hers, Nora said. Her voice was shaking. The curtains, the dishes, the furniture. Even the bedroom Father sleeps in. She touched all of it. And now you're here touching it too, like you have the right. Martha set the cake on the table to cool. You're right. I don't have the right. I didn't know your mother, didn't earn my place here. I'm just the woman who was desperate enough to take a job nobody else wanted. She looked at Nora. But I'm here. And I can spend every day apologizing for that, or I can just do the work. Which would you prefer? Nora's hands were fists again. I'd prefer you leave. I know. So why don't you? Because I have nowhere else to go. And because your sister's been eating more since I got here, and your father's stopped looking like he's about to collapse, and this house feels a little less like a tomb. Martha cut a slice of cake. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I couldn't if I wanted to. But I can bake her recipe and keep her house standing. Is that really so terrible? Nora stared at the cake, at Martha, at her own hands. Then she turned and walked away. But that night, Martha saw a slice of cake missing from the pan. On the third day of the storm, the barn door blew open. Elias had come inside for lunch when they heard the crash. He was out the door before Martha could move, running through snow that came up to his knees. Martha followed. The wind hit her like a wall, stealing her breath. She couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The barn door was swinging wildly, slamming against the wall. Inside, the horses were screaming. Elias fought his way to the door, grabbed it, tried to pull it shut. The wind ripped it from his hands. Martha reached him. Together they hauled on the door, their feet sliding in the snow. The wind fought them. Martha's hands were already going numb. "On three!" Elias shouted. "1, 2!" They pulled. The door slammed shut. Elias dropped the crossbar into place. Inside, the horses were still panicking. One had broken free of its stall and was kicking at the walls. Elias moved toward it, hands up, voice low. "Easy. Easy now." The horse reared. Its hoof came down inches from Elias's head. Martha grabbed a rope from the wall. She'd never handled a horse in her life, but fear made her bold. She threw the rope, missed, threw again, caught the halter. The horse pulled. Martha's arms screamed. She dug her heels in, leaned back with all her weight. Elias got to the other side, caught the halter in his hands. Together they guided the horse back into its stall. When it was done, they stood in the barn, breathing hard, covered in snow. "You didn't have to do that," Elias said. "The hell I didn't. That animal would have killed you." "I've handled worse." "Not today, you haven't." They walked back to the house. The wind had died down just enough to see the door. Nora stood in the frame, watching them. When they got inside, Martha's hands were blue. She couldn't feel her fingers. Elias pulled her to the fire, rubbed her hands between his. His palms were rough, warm. Martha tried not to notice. "You're going to lose a finger if you're not careful," he said. "I've been not careful my whole life. Haven't lost anything important yet." "Stubbornness isn't the same as strength?" "Lucky for you, I have both." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something like warmth crossed his face. "Yeah, lucky for me." Nora was still standing by the door. She was looking at Martha's hands in her father's hands, her expression unreadable. Then she went upstairs without a word. The storm ended on the fourth day. The silence was shocking. Martha woke to sunlight streaming through her window and a stillness so complete it felt unnatural. She went downstairs. Elsie was already at the table, bundled in blankets. The girl looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her skin even paler than usual. "You sleep?" Martha asked. Elsie shook her head. "The storm?" A nod. Martha made hot milk with honey and cinnamon. She set it in front of Elsie, who wrapped both hands around the cup like it was the only warm thing in the world. "My husband used to have nightmares," Martha said. "After the mine accident. He'd wake up choking, convinced he was buried. I'd make him this." She sat down across from Elsie. "It doesn't fix anything, but it helps." Elsie drank slowly. Her eyes stayed on Martha's face. "You miss him," Martha said. "Your mother. That's why you don't talk. Because if you start, you might have to say she's gone. And as long as you're quiet, part of you can pretend she's just in the other room." Elsie's hands tightened on the cup. "I used to do the same thing," Martha continued. "After Samuel died. I wouldn't say his name, wouldn't talk about him. Thought if I stayed silent enough, it wouldn't be real." She paused. "But silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you smaller." Elsie set down the cup. Her eyes were wet. Martha reached across the table. Didn't touch her. Just let her hand rest on the wood between them. An offer, not a demand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Elsie's hand moved, slowly, carefully, until her fingers brushed Martha's. She didn't pull away. They sat like that until the sun was fully up and Elias came in from the barn and Nora appeared on the stairs, her face puffy from sleep. The girl saw their hands and stopped. Martha expected anger, expected another explosion. Instead, Nora just looked tired. "I'm going to check the fence line," she said to her father. "Take Elsie with you. She'll slow me down. Take her anyway. She needs air." Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but Elsie had already stood up, still in her nightgown and blankets, ready to follow her sister anywhere. They left together, and Martha watched them go. "She's softening," Elias said. "She's exhausted. There's a difference." "Still progress." "Maybe." That afternoon, Martha was in the kitchen when she heard the scream. She ran outside. Nora and Elsie were in the yard, but Nora was pointing at the barn, her face white. "The ladder," she was saying. "Elsie, don't—" But Elsie was already climbing. The hayloft ladder had broken in the storm, several rungs missing, the wood cracked and unstable. The girl was halfway up, reaching for something. "Elsie, stop!" Nora shouted. Elsie didn't stop. She grabbed for the next rung. It snapped under her weight. She fell. Martha moved without thinking. She ran, her feet sliding in the snow, her arms outstretched. Elsie hit her chest, and they both went down in a heap. Martha's back slammed into the frozen ground. Pain exploded up her spine. She couldn't breathe, but Elsie was on top of her, crying, and crying meant breathing, meant alive. Nora was there, pulling her sister off, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Elsie, are you hurt?" Elsie shook her head. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face. Nora rounded on Martha. "What were you thinking? You could have been killed." Martha sat up slowly. Her back felt like it had been split in half. So could she. "She's 8. She weighs nothing. You—" Nora stopped. Her face crumpled. "You're too big. If you'd landed wrong—" "But I didn't." "You could have." Martha got to her feet. Everything hurt. What was she trying to get? Nora looked away. "A doll. Mother's doll. We used to play with it in the loft. Elsie must have seen it. A doll's not worth dying for." "It is to her." Martha looked at Elsie. The girl had stopped crying, but her whole body was shaking. She was staring at the broken ladder like it was a monster. "Come on," Martha said. "Let's go inside." She held out her hand. Elsie took it. They walked back to the house together, and for the first time since Martha arrived, Nora walked beside them instead of behind. That night, Martha couldn't sleep. Her back was screaming, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elsie falling. She went downstairs for water and found Nora sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. "Can't sleep either?" Martha asked. "Never can." Martha sat down across from her. They didn't speak for a while. Finally, Nora said, "You saved her." "Anyone would have." "No, they wouldn't have." Nora's voice was thick. "The last woman who worked here? Elsie fell in the creek, and she just stood there screaming for father. Didn't even try to help." "She was probably scared." "You were scared too. I saw your face, but you ran anyway." Martha didn't know what to say to that. "Why?" Nora asked. "Why do you care? You don't know us. We've been horrible to you." "Because she's a child," Martha said simply. "And children shouldn't have to fall alone." Nora's face twisted. She made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "I heard her," she whispered. "Today, when she was crying, she made noise. She hasn't made noise in 3 years." "I know." "What if she talks again? What if she says Mother's name?" Nora looked at Martha, and her eyes were desperate. "What if I can't remember Mother's voice anymore, and Elsie says her name and it sounds wrong?" "Then it sounds wrong," Martha said, "and you live with it. Because the alternative is your sister staying silent forever, and that's worse." Nora put her head down on the table. Her shoulders shook. Martha reached over, awkward and uncertain, and put her hand on the girl's head. Nora didn't pull away. They sat like that until the tears stopped, and when Nora finally looked up, her face was splotchy and exhausted, but something in it had shifted. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything, the clothes and the dishes, and I know. I wanted you to leave." "I know that too. But you didn't." "No," Martha said. "I didn't." Nora wiped her face on her sleeve. "You're not like the others." "I'm exactly like the others, just more stubborn." "No." Nora shook her head. "You're different. You don't try to make us love you. You just stay." Martha thought about Red Hollow, about Ruth Garrett and Susan Miller, and all the people who decided she wasn't worth staying for. "Sometimes staying is all you can do," she said. Nora nodded. Then she stood up, and for the first time she looked like a child instead of a soldier. "Good night, Mrs. Reed." "Good night, Nora." The girl went upstairs and Martha sat alone in the dark kitchen, her back aching, her heart full of something she couldn't name. Outside, the mountains were silent and still. And inside, for the first time since Caroline Ward died, the house didn't feel quite so cold. The man arrived on a Tuesday morning in early March, when the snow was finally starting to melt, and the first hints of mud were appearing in the yard. Martha was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the horse. She looked up and saw him coming down the valley road. A lone rider on a black gelding, his coat expensive looking even from a distance. Something about the way he sat in the saddle made her uneasy. She left the laundry and went to find Elias. He was in the barn, repairing a harness. "Someone's coming," she said. He looked up. "Expecting anyone?" "No." They walked out together. The rider had reached the house. He dismounted with practiced ease, tied his horse to the post, and turned to face them. He was younger than Martha had expected, maybe 35, with carefully trimmed hair and a face that would have been handsome if his eyes weren't so cold. His clothes were too fine for ranch country. City clothes. Miles City, probably, or somewhere farther east. "Mr. Ward," he said. His voice was smooth, educated. "Lucian Vale. We haven't met, but I'm sure you've heard of me." Elias's face went hard. "I've heard." "Good. Saves time." Vale's eyes swept over the ranch, taking inventory. "I'm here to discuss your water rights. They're not for sale. I haven't made an offer yet." "Doesn't matter. They're not for sale." Vale smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside. I've ridden quite a distance." "You can discuss it right here." "Very well." Vale pulled a folded document from his coat. "I'm prepared to offer you $500 for the rights to the mountain spring that feeds your property. It's a generous offer, Mr. Ward, more than fair market value. My water's not for sale at any price. Everything's for sale at the right price." Vale's voice stayed pleasant, but something sharp had entered it. "You're a practical man. You know this ranch barely turns a profit. Your herd's too small. Your land's too isolated. $500 could change that. Or I could keep my water and my land and tell you to leave." Vale's smile thinned. "I'm trying to be reasonable here." "So am I. And reasonably, I'm telling you no." Martha had been standing off to the side, trying to stay out of it. But Vale's eyes found her now, traveling up and down her body with an expression that made her skin crawl. "And who's this?" he asked. "My housekeeper," Elias said shortly. "Housekeeper?" Vale said the word like he was tasting something rotten. "How domestic? Tell me, does the county know you're employing a woman in such an isolated location, living under the same roof, raising your daughters with no proper female supervision?" "Mrs. Reed is proper supervision." "Mrs. Reed." Vale looked at her again. "A widow, I assume. From Red Hollow, by any chance?" Martha's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know things." He turned back to Elias. "Martha Reed, evicted for non-payment of taxes. No family, no prospects. Quite the scandal, from what I hear. The church ladies had quite a lot to say about her." "Get off my property," Elias said. "I'm simply pointing out that a man raising two young girls in a remote location with a woman of questionable character, well, it raises concerns. Child welfare concerns." The air went cold. "What did you just say?" Elias's voice was deadly quiet. "I said concerns, and concerns require investigation." Vale refolded the document and tucked it away. "I have friends in the county office, good friends. They'd be very interested to hear about the conditions up here, the isolation, the lack of schooling, the presence of an unmarried woman living in close quarters with a widower and his daughters." Martha found her voice. "There's nothing improper happening here." "I'm sure there isn't, but appearances matter, don't they? Especially when children are involved." Vale mounted his horse. "Think about my offer, Mr. Ward. $500 is generous. But if you refuse, I'll have to pursue other avenues to secure what I need. And those avenues might prove uncomfortable for everyone involved." He turned his horse and rode back up the valley. They watched until he disappeared over the ridge. "Who is he?" Martha asked. "Businessman from Miles City. Owns half the county already. Wants to build a commercial operation farther down the mountain. Timber mill, maybe, or a mining concern. Needs water rights to do it." Elias's jaw was tight. He's been after this spring for 2 years, made offers to Caroline before she died. Can he really do what he threatened? Report you to the county? If he wants to badly enough. Elias looked at her. I'm sorry, I didn't think he'd come here. Didn't think he'd bring you into it. He's bluffing. Maybe, maybe not. Elias started walking toward the barn. Vale doesn't make idle threats. If he says he'll report me, he will. Martha followed him. So what do we do? We. This isn't your fight. It is if he's using me as ammunition. Elias stopped, turned. You could leave, before this gets worse. I'd pay you what I owe, help you get settled somewhere else. You're trying to get rid of me again. I'm trying to keep you from getting dragged into a mess that's not yours. Martha thought about Red Hollow, about the courthouse steps and Ruth Garrett's voice. This town doesn't need your kind anymore. I've already been dragged through the mud, she said. What's a little more? Something shifted in Elias's expression. You're sure? No, but I'm staying anyway. He nodded slowly. Then he went into the barn, and Martha stood alone in the yard, watching the place where Vale had disappeared. She had a bad feeling about this. The summons came 3 weeks later. Deputy Morrison delivered it himself, riding all the way up the mountain with a face full of apology. I'm sorry, Ward. Tried to talk them out of it, but Vale's got friends in the right places. Elias read the document. His face went white. A fitness hearing. What's that? Martha asked. It means the county wants to determine if I'm fit to raise my own daughters. He looked at Morrison. This is horseshit, Dan. You know it is. I know. But I'm just the messenger. Hearing set for 2 weeks from Friday in Red Hollow. You'll need to appear, bring the girls, answer questions about their living conditions. Morrison glanced at Martha. You too, ma'am. They'll want to question you about the household. After he left, Elias paced the kitchen like a caged animal. Nora and Elsie had been sent upstairs, but Martha could hear their footsteps overhead. They knew something was wrong. He can't do this, Elias said. Those are my daughters. He's using the law to get what he wants. If you look unfit, the county could place the girls with someone else. And if you're desperate to get them back, I'd sell him the water rights. Elias slammed his hand on the table. That bastard! Martha sat down. Her mind was racing. We fight it. Go to the hearing, answer their questions, prove there's nothing wrong here. You don't know Red Hollow. You don't know how these people think. I lived there for 30 years. I know exactly how they think. She looked at him. They'll attack me. My character, my reputation. They'll make it sound like I'm some kind of predator. Then we find someone else to testify, someone respectable. Who? You said yourself this ranch is isolated. Who's going to vouch for us? Elias sat down hard. I don't know. They sat in silence. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. Elsie was walking back and forth, anxious. I should leave, Martha said quietly. If I'm gone, they can't use me against you. And what happens to the girls? They're just starting to... Elias stopped. Elsie's been different since you came. Calmer. She eats more. And Nora, you've seen her. She's not fighting anymore. She'll fight again if I'm the reason you lose them. You're not the reason. Vale is. But I'm the excuse he's using. The door opened. They both turned. Nora stood in the doorway, her face pale. How long have you been listening? Elias asked. Long enough. She came into the kitchen. They're going to take us away. No, we're going to fight this. How? By dragging Mrs. Reed through the mud? By letting them call her terrible things in front of the whole county? Nora's voice was shaking. I heard what that man said about her being questionable, about improper conduct. None of that's true. Doesn't matter if it's true. It only matters what they believe. Nora looked at Martha. And they'll believe the worst. They always do. Martha wanted to argue, couldn't. So we tell the truth, Elias said. We show them this is a good home, that you girls are cared for. Will they let Elsie testify? Martha asked. She doesn't talk. She made sound when she fell. You heard it, Nora. She cried. Nora nodded. But she hasn't done it since. Maybe she would, if she understood what was at stake. You want to put that pressure on an 8-year-old? Elias shook his head. No, we'll figure something else out. But the next 2 weeks passed without a solution. Elias rode to Red Hollow twice trying to find someone who would testify on their behalf. He came back both times empty-handed. "Everyone I talked to said the same thing," he told Martha. "They don't want to cross Vale. He owns too much, knows too many people. Getting on his bad side means losing business." "What about the church?" "The church ladies are the ones pushing hardest for this hearing." Of course they were. Martha could picture Ruth Garrett's face, Susan Miller's fake concern. This was their chance to prove they'd been right about her all along. The night before the hearing, Martha couldn't sleep. She got up and found Elsie sitting on the stairs in her nightgown. "Can't sleep either?" Martha asked. Elsie shook her head. Martha sat down beside her. "You scared?" A nod. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. Then Elsie reached over and took Martha's hand. Her fingers were small, cold. "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow," Martha said quietly, "but I want you to know something. Whatever those people say about me, whatever they call me, none of it changes how I feel about you and your sister. You understand?" Elsie squeezed her hand. "And if things go badly, if they decide I can't stay here anymore, you'll be all right. Your father loves you. Nora loves you. You're going to be all right." Elsie's other hand moved. She pointed at Martha, then at her own chest. Then she held up her hand, fingers spread. Martha frowned. "I don't—" Elsie did it again, pointed at Martha, at herself, 5 fingers. And then Martha understood. "You, me, family." Her throat closed up. "Yeah, sweetheart, family." Elsie leaned against her shoulder. They sat like that until the house got cold and Martha's legs went numb. And when they finally went back to bed, Martha's face was wet with tears she couldn't quite explain. The courthouse in Red Hollow was packed. Martha hadn't expected that. She'd thought this would be a quiet affair, a judge, a few county officials, maybe a clerk. But when they arrived, the gallery was full. Townspeople filled every bench, craning their necks to see. Ruth Garrett sat in the front row, Susan Miller beside her. The church auxiliary had turned out in force. They'd come to watch her burn. Elias saw it too. His face went tight. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." They took their seats at the defendant's table. Nora sat beside her father, her back straight, her face carved from ice. Elsie sat next to Martha, so small in her chair her feet didn't touch the floor. The judge entered. Judge Harrow, an old man with white hair and a face like weathered leather. Martha didn't know if that was good or bad. "All rise," the clerk said. The hearing began. Vale's lawyer went first, a sharp-faced man named Pritchard who spoke in clipped, precise sentences. He laid out the complaint. Isolated location, inadequate supervision, presence of an unsuitable woman in the household. "Mr. Ward's ranch is 40 miles from the nearest town," Pritchard said. "The children have no access to schooling, no regular contact with other children, no female role model except for the defendant, Mrs. Martha Reed." "Mrs. Reed is not the defendant here," Judge Harrow said. "Isn't she? This entire case revolves around her presence in that household." Pritchard turned to the gallery. "Mrs. Reed was evicted from her home for non-payment of taxes. She has no family, no references, no history of employment in childcare. And yet Mr. Ward has installed her in his remote ranch house, where she lives in close quarters with him and his 2 impressionable daughters." Whispers rippled through the crowd. "The implication being," the judge asked, "that the situation is at best inappropriate and at worst dangerous. These children deserve better than to be raised in isolation by a man and a woman who are not married and have no legal right to cohabitate." "We're not cohabitating," Elias said. "She works for me." "In what capacity exactly? Housekeeper, governess, companion?" Pritchard smiled. "The lines seem rather blurred." "The lines are clear. She cooks, cleans, and looks after my children, that's all. And sleeps under the same roof, eats at the same table, spends long winter nights isolated with you while your daughters sleep upstairs." Pritchard let that hang in the air. "Surely you can see how this appears." Elias stood up. "Nothing improper is happening in my house." "Sit down, Mr. Ward," the judge said. "He's making it sound like I said sit down." Elias sat. His hands were shaking. Pritchard called his first witness, Ruth Garrett. She took the stand looking pleased with herself, her dress pressed, her hair arranged just so. "Mrs. Garrett," Pritchard said, "you've known Mrs. Reed for some time." All her life. We grew up together in Red Hollow. And what can you tell us about her character? Ruth folded her hands primly. Martha was always troubled, even as a girl. She was large, you see, unnatural-sized, and after her husband died, she became reclusive, refused help from the church, refused companionship. It was clear she had no interest in living a proper Christian life. Objection, Elias said. What does her size have to do with anything? It speaks to her nature, Ruth said. A woman who can't control her appetites. That's enough, the judge said. But the damage was done. Martha could feel every eye in the room on her body. Mrs. Garrett, Pritchard continued, in your opinion, is Mrs. Reed fit to serve as a female role model for young girls? Absolutely not. She's a widow living alone with a man. She has no morals, no decency. Those poor girls are being corrupted by her mere presence. Martha's fingernails dug into her palms. Thank you, Mrs. Garrett. Susan Miller went next. Then two other women from the church auxiliary. They all said the same things in different words. Improper, indecent, unfit. Then Pritchard called his final witness. I'd like to call Nora Ward to the stand. Elias was on his feet instantly. No, absolutely not. She's old enough to testify about her own living conditions. She's 14 years old. Old enough to know right from wrong. Pritchard looked at the judge. Unless Mr. Ward has something to hide. Judge Harrow sighed. I'll allow it, but keep it brief. Nora stood up. Her face was white but set. She walked to the stand like she was walking to a gallows. Pritchard approached her. Miss Ward, you've been living with Mrs. Reed for several months now, is that correct? Yes. And how has that been? Nora hesitated. Martha could see her weighing her words. It's been fine, Nora said. Just fine? Not difficult? Not uncomfortable? No. Come now, Miss Ward. You can be honest. Has Mrs. Reed ever made you feel unsafe? No. Has she ever behaved inappropriately? Said things that made you uncomfortable? No. Has your father ever behaved inappropriately with Mrs. Reed? No. Nora's voice rose. Nothing like that happens. Mrs. Reed cooks and cleans. Father works the ranch. We're just trying to survive up there. Survive? Pritchard seized on the word. An interesting choice. Why survive? Why not thrive? Because it's hard. The ranch is hard. The winter's hard. Everything's hard. And yet your father insists on keeping you there, in that hard, isolated place, with a woman whose reputation is questionable at best. Pritchard leaned in. Wouldn't you and your sister be better off somewhere else? Somewhere safe? With a proper family? Nora's hands gripped the armrests. We are a proper family. Are you? Your mother's dead. Your father's struggling. And the only woman in your life is a stranger who is desperate enough to take any job offered. She's not a stranger anymore. What is she then? Nora opened her mouth, closed it. Martha could see her struggling. Nora's voice cracked. She's the one who stayed. The courtroom went quiet. The one who stayed, Pritchard repeated, because she had nowhere else to go. No, because we needed her and she knew it, and she stayed anyway. Tears were running down Nora's face now. Everyone else left. Every woman father hired, they all left. But Mrs. Reed stayed, even when I was horrible to her, even when I tried to drive her away. She stayed. Miss Ward, she saved my sister's life, Nora was shouting now. Elsie fell and Mrs. Reed caught her. She could have been hurt, could have broken her back, but she did it anyway because she cares about us. That's very touching, Pritchard said. But caring isn't enough to make someone fit to raise children. Then what is? Because those women in the gallery calling her unfit? They watched her collapse in the snow and they laughed. They mocked her. They treated her like she was nothing. Nora pointed at Ruth Garrett. You talk about morals? You left a woman to die in the street and you call that moral? Nora, that's enough, Elias said. But Nora wasn't done. Mrs. Reed is twice the woman any of you are. And if you take us away from her and father, if you give us to some proper family that doesn't want us, I'll run away. I swear I will. I'll take Elsie and we'll disappear and you'll never find us. Miss Ward, sit down, the judge said. Not until you listen. Nora turned to Judge Harrow.
We're not being abused. We're not being neglected. We have food. We have shelter. We have people who love us. Isn't that enough? Or does it not count because Mrs. Reed is fat and poor and from Red Hollow? Nora! Elias's voice was sharp. Nora sat down. Her whole body was shaking. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harrow banged his gavel. Order! Order! The noise died down slowly. Pritchard stood there, looking smug. Your Honor, I think the child's emotional outburst proves my point. These girls are living in an unstable environment. They need structure, guidance. They need to be left alone, someone said. Everyone turned. Elsie had stood up from her chair. The courtroom froze. Elsie's face was white. Her hands were trembling, but she was standing, and her eyes were fixed on Lucian Vale, who sat in the front row beside Pritchard. She pointed at him. Bad man, she said. Her voice was small, rough from disuse, but it carried in the silence. Bad man, she said again. Then she started to cry, and Martha scooped her up, and the courtroom exploded. Judge Harrow's gavel came down like thunder. Order! I will have order in this court. But it took 5 minutes to get the room quiet again. People were shouting, arguing. Ruth Garrett looked like she'd been slapped. Vale's face had gone red. When silence finally fell, the judge looked at Elsie, still in Martha's arms. That child just spoke for the first time in 3 years, he said slowly, and her first words were to call the plaintiff a bad man. He turned to Vale. Mr. Vale, I'm going to ask you directly. What's your interest in this case? Vale stood up. I'm a concerned citizen. The welfare of children. Horseshit. The judge's voice was flat. You want the Ward property. You've been trying to buy those water rights for years. And when Mr. Ward refused to sell, you found another way to pressure him. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? Because it seems mighty convenient that this hearing comes right after Mr. Ward turned down your latest offer. Judge Harrow looked at Pritchard. And you? Did Vale pay you to bring this case? Pritchard's face went white. That is, my client. Your client is a man trying to use the county legal system to steal another man's land, and you helped him do it. The judge stood up. This hearing is over. The complaint is dismissed. Mr. Ward, you're free to go. Take your daughters home. The courtroom erupted again. Vale was on his feet shouting. Ruth Garrett looked like she'd bitten into something rotten. Elias grabbed Martha's arm. We need to leave. Now. They pushed through the crowd. People were yelling at them, at each other. Someone grabbed Martha's sleeve. She yanked free. They made it outside. The air was cold, clean after the suffocating courthouse. Elias helped Martha into the wagon, Elsie still in her arms. Nora climbed up beside them. As they pulled away, Martha saw Vale standing on the courthouse steps. He was staring at them, his face a mask of cold fury. This isn't over, he called after them. You hear me, Ward? This isn't over. Elias didn't look back. He snapped the reins and the horses broke into a trot. They rode in silence for the first hour. Elsie had fallen asleep in Martha's lap, exhausted from crying. Nora sat beside her father, staring at nothing. Finally, Elias spoke. What you did back there, what you both did. I can't. His voice broke. Thank you. We didn't do anything, Nora said quietly. We just told the truth. The truth was enough. Martha looked down at Elsie. The girl's face was peaceful in sleep, her mouth slightly open. She spoke, Martha said. I know. 3 years of silence, and she spoke. She called Vale a bad man. Elias almost laughed. Kid's got good instincts. She knew, somehow she knew he was the threat. They rode on. The sun was setting, turning the snow-covered mountains pink and gold, beautiful and harsh and utterly indifferent. He meant what he said, Martha said. Vale, this isn't over. I know. What's he going to do? I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll deal with it. Elias glanced at her. Together. Martha nodded. She should have felt relieved. They'd won. The hearing was over, the girls were safe, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight hadn't even started yet. They were 3 days back at the ranch when the letter arrived. Martha saw the rider coming up the valley at dawn. Not Vale this time. Someone younger, moving fast. He handed Elias an envelope and left without a word. Elias opened it at the kitchen table.
Martha watched his face go from tired to gray. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer, just passed her the letter. It was from the bank in Miles City. Legal language, cold and precise. But the meaning was clear enough. The ranch was in default on a loan Martha hadn't known existed. Payment was due in full within 30 days, or the property would be seized and sold at auction. The amount made her stomach drop. $1,200. "I don't understand," Martha said. "You never mentioned a loan, because I took it out 4 years ago, before Caroline died." Elias's voice was flat. "We were going to expand the herd, build a new barn. Then she got pregnant and everything went to hell. I've been paying the minimum since, barely keeping ahead." "How much do you have?" "Maybe 300, if I sell every cow on the property." Martha did the math. $900 short. Might as well be 9,000. "Vale," she said. "What?" "This is Vale. He owns half the county, you said. He probably owns the bank too, or knows who does. The hearing didn't work, so now he's coming at you from a different angle." Elias crumpled the letter in his fist. "If he forecloses, the bank will auction the property, and Vale will be the only bidder. He'll get the land, the water rights, everything. Can you refinance? Get another loan?" "From who?" "Every bank within 100 miles is connected to Vale somehow." He stood up, walked to the window. "I'm going to lose it. After everything Caroline and I built, I'm going to lose it." Martha stared at the crumpled letter. 30 days. Not enough time to earn that kind of money. Not enough time to do anything except watch it all fall apart. "There has to be something," she said. "There isn't. Your cattle, your equipment, won't bring in half what we need. Then we go to Miles City, find a lawyer, fight the foreclosure." "With what money? I can't even pay the loan, let alone legal fees." Elias turned from the window. His face was empty, defeated. "It's over, Martha. I just don't know how to tell the girls." Martha thought about Nora's voice in the courtroom. She's the one who stayed. Thought about Elsie's small hand in hers, her whispered words. Bad man. They'd fought so hard to keep this family together, and now some banker's letter was going to rip it all apart. "No," she said. "No what?" "No, it's not over. Not yet." Martha stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but she made herself move. "I have something. Maybe it's enough." "You don't have $1,200. "I don't know what I have." She went upstairs to her room, Elias following. She pulled the carpet bag from under her bed and dug through it until she found the small leather pouch Samuel had given her. She'd carried it for 2 years without opening it, too afraid of what it would mean, too afraid that whatever was inside would be the final proof that he was really gone. Her hands shook as she loosened the drawstring. Gold coins spilled onto the bed. 20 of them. Maybe more. Elias stared. "Where did you get these?" "My husband. He gave them to me the day before he died. Said he'd been saving for years in case something happened to him." Martha picked up one of the coins. It was heavy, real. "I never counted them. Couldn't bring myself to." Elias counted now. 22 gold eagles, $20 each, $440. "It's not enough," he said quietly. "I know, but it's something." Martha looked at him. "What else do you have? Anything you can sell?" "The wagon, some tools, Caroline's sewing machine." Martha thought about the sewing machine she'd seen in the corner of the bedroom, covered in dust. "How much would that bring?" "Maybe $50 if I can find a buyer." "And the cattle?" $300, like I said." Martha did the math again. 440 plus 50 plus 300, 790. Still 300 short. But it was closer than they'd been 5 minutes ago. "We go to Miles City," Martha said. "Sell everything we can. See how close we can get. And if we're still short, then we figure something else out, but we don't give up." She looked at the coins on the bed, Samuel's life savings, the only thing she had left of him. "We don't give up." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "I can't take your husband's money." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it." "Martha, those girls upstairs, they're the first people in 2 years who've made me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something besides mockery." Her voice cracked. "Samuel would want me to use this money to protect something good. And this family is good, broken and messy and barely holding together, but good." Elias's throat worked. He nodded once, sharp. "All right, we leave tomorrow." They told the girls that night. Nora took it like a blow to the chest, silent, her face going white. Elsie just stared at her plate. "We're going to fight this," Elias said. "We're going to sell everything we can and pay off as much of the loan as possible." "And if it's not enough," Nora asked, "then we find another way." "There is no other way. If Vale wants this ranch, he'll get it. Not if we pay the debt first." Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what? We're barely surviving as it is." "With what we have. Mrs. Reed has money saved." "No." Nora stood up. "No, we're not taking her money." "It's my choice to give it," Martha said. "It's your husband's money, your security. You can't just—" Nora's voice broke. "We've already taken so much from you. You've given me more. A job? A place to sleep? A reason to get up in the morning." Martha looked at both girls. "I spent 2 years in Red Hollow feeling like I was already dead, just waiting for it to be official. And then I came here, and you two made me remember what it feels like to be needed." Elsie's eyes were wet. She slipped off her chair and came to Martha, wrapped her arms around her waist. Martha held her, looked at Nora over her head. "We're going to fight," she said. "All of us. Together." Nora stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. They left before dawn. Elias drove the wagon, loaded with everything they could sell: the sewing machine, tools, spare tack, 2 of the cattle tied behind. Martha sat beside him, the leather pouch in her pocket. Nora and Elsie stayed behind. Elias had wanted to bring them, but Martha convinced him otherwise. "They've been dragged through enough. Let them stay here where it's safe." The ride to Miles City took all day. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? Either they'd come back with enough money, or they wouldn't. Words didn't change that. Miles City was bigger than Red Hollow, 3 times the size, with actual storefronts and paved streets in the center of town. Martha had only been here once before, when Samuel was dying, and they'd come to see a specialist who couldn't help. She didn't have good memories of this place. They went to the bank first. Elias wanted to see exactly how much time they had, see if there was any chance of negotiating. The bank manager was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He listened to Elias's plea with a face like carved wood. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ward. The terms of the loan are clear. Full payment by the end of the month, or foreclosure proceedings begin. Can't you extend the deadline? Give me another month?" "I don't have the authority to make that decision." "Then who does?" The manager hesitated. "The loan was recently purchased by a private investor. All decisions now go through him." "Who's the investor?" Another hesitation. "Mr. Lucian Vale." Elias's hands clenched on the desk. "Of course it is. If you'd like, I can arrange a meeting." "No." Elias stood up. "We'll get you the money." They left the bank and started selling. The sewing machine went first to a merchant's wife who haggled hard but eventually paid $45. The tools brought another $30. The cattle sold for $280 to a rancher who looked at Elias with pity. By late afternoon, they had just over $760, $340 short. They sat in the wagon as the sun set, counting and recounting the money like it might multiply if they looked at it enough times. "We need a miracle," Elias said. "Miracles don't exist." Nora said so. "Then what do we do?" Martha looked at the bank across the street. Lights were on in the upper windows. Vale was probably up there right now, counting the days until he could take everything Elias had built. "There's one thing we haven't tried," she said. "What?" "We ask him, directly. No lawyers, no courtroom, just us and him." Elias looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "He'll laugh in our faces." "Maybe, but at least we'll have tried everything." Martha climbed down from the wagon. "Come on." The bank was closed, but they went around to the side entrance. A clerk tried to stop them, but Martha pushed past him and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Vale's office was at the end of the hall. The door was open. He sat behind a massive desk, reading documents by lamplight. He looked up when they entered, and his expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "Mr. Ward, Mrs. Reed, this is unexpected." "We want to make a deal," Elias said. "Do you?" Vale leaned back in his chair. "How fascinating. And what could you possibly have that I want?" $760. It's not the full amount, but it's most of it.
We're asking you to accept it as payment and forgive the rest. Vale laughed. Actually laughed. Forgive $340? Why would I do that?
Because you're going to get the ranch anyway if we don't pay. This way you get most of your money back. But I don't want most of my money. I want your land. Vale stood up, came around the desk. You understand this was never about the loan, don't you? The hearing didn't work, so I simply found another way. I always find another way. You're destroying a family for water rights, Martha said. I'm conducting business, nothing personal. It's personal to us. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you refused my generous offer. Vale looked at the money in Elias's hands. $760. You know what? I'll take it. Elias's face lit with hope. You will? Of course, as partial payment. You'll still owe the balance, and when you can't pay, I'll foreclose anyway. But thank you for saving me the trouble of liquidating quite so many assets. The hope died. Elias's face went hard. You bastard! Businessman. The distinction matters. Vale returned to his desk. You have 2 weeks left. I suggest you spend them preparing your daughters for the move. I hear there's a nice boarding school in Helena that takes charity cases. Something inside Martha snapped. She'd spent her whole life being quiet, being small, accepting cruelty because fighting back only made things worse. But she was done being quiet. You want to know what I think? She said. Vale looked at her. Not particularly. I think you're terrified. That got his attention. Excuse me? You heard me. Terrified. That's why you're doing this, not for money. You have plenty, not for water rights. You could get them somewhere else. You're doing this because Elias said no to you, and you can't stand it. Vale's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? How many people in this town tell you no? How many refuse your offers? Martha stepped closer. I'm guessing none. And when Elias did, when he stood up to you, it scared you. Because if one person can say no and get away with it, others might too. And then where does that leave you? Mrs. Reed, I suggest you stop talking. Why? What are you going to do? Ruin me? I've already been ruined. Humiliate me? Already been humiliated. You can't hurt me any more than the people in Red Hollow already have. Martha's voice rose. But Elias? His daughters? They're good people trying to survive. And you're going to destroy them anyway because your pride can't handle rejection. Vale's face had gone red. Get out of my office. We're not done. I said get out. A guard appeared in the doorway, large, armed. He didn't have to say anything. Elias took Martha's arm. Come on. They left. The guard followed them all the way to the street. They sat in the wagon, not moving, not speaking. I'm sorry, Martha said finally. I shouldn't have. No, you were right. Elias stared at the bank building. About all of it. He's not going to stop. No matter what we do, he'll find a way to take the ranch. So what do we do? Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he said, we go home. Spend the time we have left with the girls. And when the end comes, at least we'll have tried. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to find some solution, some miracle that would fix everything. But there wasn't one. Some fights you couldn't win. They drove out of Miles City as the last light faded from the sky. Halfway home, in the dark with nothing but stars overhead, Elias spoke again. When they take the ranch, I'll have nothing. No land, no house. I'll have to find work somewhere, probably have to split up the girls. Don't! I'm just being realistic. Be realistic later. Right now, just drive. They drove in silence. But somewhere around midnight, Martha's hand found Elias's on the bench seat between them. He didn't pull away. They reached the ranch at dawn. Nora and Elsie were waiting on the porch, and Martha could see the hope die in their faces when they saw the wagon still loaded with unsold goods. You couldn't sell everything? Nora asked. We sold it, Elias said. Wasn't enough. How much are we short? $340. Nora's shoulders sagged. Elsie started crying silently, tears running down her face. Martha climbed down from the wagon. Her body ached. Her head throbbed. She wanted to sleep for a week. Instead, she went to Elsie and picked her up. The girl wrapped around her like a vine. It's not over yet, Martha said. Yes, it is, Nora said. We all know it is. We have 2 weeks. A lot can happen in 2 weeks. Like what? A miracle? Maybe. Nora laughed bitterly. You don't believe in miracles. No, but I believe in fighting until the last second. Martha looked at Elias. We're not giving up. Not until they drag us off this land. Elias met her eyes. Something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or just two people too stubborn to quit. All right, he said. We fight. The next week was strange. They all knew what was coming, but they went through the motions anyway. Elias worked the ranch. Martha cooked and cleaned. The girls did their chores. At night, they sat together in the kitchen. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just existed in the same space, memorizing it. One evening, Elias said, I need to tell you girls something. They looked up from the table where Elsie was drawing and Nora was mending a dress. If we lose the ranch, he continued, we'll have to leave. Find somewhere else to live. It might not be together, at least not at first. No, Nora's voice was sharp. We stay together, whatever happens. It might not be possible. Then we make it possible. Nora looked at Martha. All of us. Martha's throat tightened. Nora, you're part of this family now. You don't get to leave just because things get hard. I'm not leaving, but if your father has to find work somewhere, I can't just... Why not? Nora stood up. Why can't you? You don't have anywhere else to go. We don't want you to go. So why can't you just stay? Because... Martha stopped. She didn't have a good answer. Elias was watching her. She has a point. I can't just attach myself to your family. Why not? Elias asked. Same question, different voice. You've been part of it for months now. The girls love you. He stopped. Started again. You've become important to us. To all of us. Martha looked at him, at the way he was looking at her, like she mattered, like she was more than just the housekeeper who'd been desperate enough to take the job. I don't know what happens after this, she said quietly. I don't know how to plan for a future that might not exist. Neither do we, Elias said. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we face it together, whatever comes. That night, Martha lay in bed and thought about futures and families and all the things she'd convinced herself she couldn't have. She thought about Samuel, about the life they'd built and lost, and she thought about Elias and the girls, about this broken, messy family that had somehow knit itself around her without her even noticing. She fell asleep with tears on her face and woke to Elsie shaking her shoulder. Mrs. Reed, wake up! Martha sat up. The room was dark. What's wrong? Elsie took her hand and pulled. Martha followed her downstairs. The whole family was in the kitchen, Elias, Nora, even Elsie now, and on the table was money, piles of it. What is this? Martha asked. We've been counting, Nora said. Everything we have, every last cent. We already counted. Not everything. Elias gestured to the piles. Caroline's jewelry, the silver that belonged to my mother, some old tools I forgot about in the barn. It's not much, but $93, Nora interrupted. We're $93 closer. Martha did the math. $760 plus 93, $853. Still almost 300 short, but closer. Impossibly closer. There's more, Elias said. He was holding something, a small wooden box. He opened it, and Martha saw a ring, simple gold band, a little scratched. It was Caroline's, he said quietly. Her wedding ring. I haven't been able to sell it, but if it helps. No, Martha said. No, you can't sell that. It's just a thing. If it saves the ranch, it's not just a thing, it's her. Martha looked at Nora and Elsie. Your mother wore that ring. You can't give it up. We can if it means staying together, Nora said. They were all looking at her. This family that had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. This family that was willing to sacrifice the last pieces of their past to build a future. Martha's eyes burned. How much would it bring? Maybe $50, Elias said. Maybe a little more if we're lucky. $900. Still 200 short of the $1,200 they needed. $200 might as well be $2,000. Martha sat down at the table, put her head in her hands. We're so close, she whispered. I know. It's not fair. I know that too. They sat in the kitchen as dawn broke outside. The money was counted and recounted. The ring sat in its box. And somewhere in Miles City, Lucian Vale was probably sleeping soundly, knowing he'd won. But then Elias said something that changed everything. What if we don't just pay the debt? What if we make it so he can't take the land even if we're short? Martha looked up. How? Marriage. The word hung in the air. If we're married, Elias continued slowly, working it out as he spoke, the property becomes jointly owned. He can't foreclose on half of it. And if we pay as much as we can, show good faith. It's still not enough, Martha said. No, but it's protection. It makes it legally messier for him. Might buy us time. Or it might do nothing. Might, Elias looked at her. But I'm asking anyway. Martha Reed, will you marry me? The question was absurd. They barely knew each other. They'd spent months circling each other like wary animals, building something fragile and undefined. This wasn't romance. This was survival. But when Martha looked at his face, at the desperate hope there, she thought about all the ways survival could look like love if you squinted right. Yes, she said. Nora gasped. Elsie's face lit up. Yes, Martha said again. But we do it now, today, before Vale can do anything else. They rode to Red Hollow at dawn. No ceremony, no witnesses except the girls. The county clerk married them in his office with ink-stained hands and a bored expression. Elias put Caroline's ring back in the box. Martha didn't wear it. When it was done, they had a piece of paper that said Martha Reed was now Martha Ward. She stared at it, at her new name, and felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life. But Elsie took her hand and Nora smiled at her, and Elias said thank you so quietly she almost missed it. And Martha thought maybe this life could be hers after all. They went to the bank in Miles City that afternoon, all of them together. The manager looked surprised to see them. More surprised when Elias presented the marriage certificate and $853. We're paying what we can, Elias said. And as my wife, Mrs. Ward, has a legal stake in the property. If you foreclose, you'll have to go through both of us. The manager looked at the money, at the certificate, at Martha. I'll need to consult with Mr. Vale. You do that. They waited. 3 hours in that bank, sitting on hard chairs while clerks whispered and the manager disappeared into back rooms. Finally, Vale himself appeared. His face was thunderous. A marriage of convenience, he said. How touching. It's legal, Elias said. It's desperate. We prefer creative. Vale looked at Martha. You actually married him. I did. For money. For family. Something flickered across his face. This doesn't change anything. You're still short. We know. But we've paid most of it. And as joint owners of the property, I could still foreclose. You could try, but it'd take months in court, and we'd fight you every step of the way. Elias stood up. Is it worth it? Months of legal fees, public scrutiny, all for $300? Vale's jaw worked. He looked at the money on the manager's desk. Then, to everyone's shock, he smiled. You know what? Keep your ranch. Silence. What? Elias said. I said keep it. This has stopped being worth my time. Vale turned to leave, then paused. But Mr. Ward, we're not done. You've made an enemy today, and I have a very long memory. He left. They stood there, stunned. Did we just, Nora started. Win, Martha finished. I think we just won. The ride home was quiet. Shock, maybe. Or exhaustion. But when they crested the ridge and saw the ranch spread out below them in the valley, something in Martha's chest loosened. This was home now. Legally, officially, impossibly home. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard. They all climbed down. I know this wasn't, he started. The marriage. I know it was just for... Don't, Martha said. Let's just see what happens. He nodded. That night, Martha lay in her own bed in her own room, listening to the house settle around her. Elias was in the room down the hall. The girls were upstairs. They were married, but nothing had changed. Not really, except everything had changed, and Martha fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, she'd found the place she was meant to be all along. The week after they paid the bank, word spread through the county like wildfire. Martha heard about it from the supply merchant when she and Elias went to town for flour and salt. The man couldn't stop grinning as he loaded their wagon. Heard you folks gave Vale a bloody nose, he said. That true? Elias didn't answer, but the merchant kept talking anyway. His lawyer left town, just packed up and disappeared. And the bank manager suddenly decided to take a job in Helena. Folks are saying Vale's lost his grip. Martha exchanged a glance with Elias. They'd expected retaliation, not whatever this was. Don't celebrate yet, Elias said as they drove out of town. Vale doesn't give up that easy. Maybe he already has. Or maybe he's just getting started. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. No letters, no threats, no riders coming up the valley. Spring arrived properly, melting the last of the snow and turning the valley green. The cattle fattened on new grass. Elsie started helping in the garden, her voice growing stronger each day. Nora smiled more. And Martha and Elias moved around each other like two people learning a dance neither of them knew the steps to. They were married on paper, lived in the same house, shared meals and responsibilities, and the weight of keeping the ranch running. But they slept in separate rooms, spoke carefully to each other, maintained the fiction that this was still just an arrangement. Until one night in late April when Elias knocked on Martha's bedroom door. She opened it in her nightgown, her hair down. Something wrong? No, He stopped, started again. Can we talk? They went down to the kitchen. Martha made coffee while Elias sat at the table, his hands clasped in front of him. I don't know how to do this, he said finally. Do what? This. Us. Be married to someone who isn't Caroline. Martha poured the coffee, sat down across from him. I don't know how to be married to someone who isn't Samuel, but we are. Yes. And I don't... Elias rubbed his face. I don't know what you want from me, what this is supposed to be. Martha wrapped her hands around her cup. The heat felt good against her palms. What do you want it to be? I don't know. At first it was just practical, protection for the ranch, but now... He looked at her. Now I find myself thinking about you when I'm in the barn, wondering what you're doing, if you're all right. And I don't know if that's just gratitude or something more. Martha's heart was beating too fast. Elias, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I'm trying, to figure this out, to be a real husband instead of just, I think about you too, Martha interrupted. When I'm cooking, when I'm mending clothes. I think about your hands and how gentle they are with the horses. I think about your voice when you're talking to the girls. I think about what it would be like if this was real. It is real. We're married. You know what I mean. Elias stood up, came around the table, sat in the chair next to hers instead of across from her. What if we tried, he said quietly, to make it real, not rush it, not force it, just see what happens. Martha looked at him, at his gray eyes and weathered face and the hope written there. All right, she said, we try. He reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm. They sat like that until the coffee went cold. Summer came hard and bright. The ranch work multiplied. Fences to mend, cattle to move, hay to cut. Martha worked alongside Elias and the girls, her body remembering rhythms it had forgotten. She was still heavy, still ached at the end of long days. But she was stronger now. The work had built muscle under the softness. Elias noticed. She caught him looking sometimes, his expression unreadable. One evening in July, after the girls had gone to bed, he said, You're different than when you came here. How so? Steadier? Like you've found your footing. Maybe I have. It suits you. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled. That night, for the first time, Elias kissed her. Not passionately. They weren't there yet. Just a soft press of lips, tentative and searching. When he pulled back, Martha's eyes were wet. Sorry, he said. I didn't mean to... Don't apologize, I'm just... She wiped her eyes. It's been a long time since anyone kissed me like they meant it. I meant it. I know. They didn't rush, didn't push, but slowly, carefully, the space between them began to close. In August, Nora started teaching Elsie to read using an old primer they'd found in the attic. Martha would watch them at the kitchen table, Nora's patient voice guiding her sister through words, and feel something swell in her chest. You're good with her, she told Nora one afternoon. I should have been doing this all along, teaching her things, but I was too angry. You were grieving.
I'm still grieving, but I'm also, Nora looked at Martha. I'm also happy, for the first time in years, and I don't know how to feel about that. Why not? Because if I'm happy, does that mean I've forgotten Mother? Does that mean she didn't matter? Martha sat down beside her. Your mother will always matter, but she's gone, Nora, and you're still here, living, growing. She'd want that for you. How do you know? Because I'm a mother too. Not yours, I know. But I understand what it means to want the best for the children you love. And the best thing for you is to live, fully, without guilt. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm glad Father married you. Even though it was just to save the ranch. It wasn't just for that. Not really, Nora smiled. He looks at you the way he used to look at Mother, like you're the best thing in the room. Martha's throat tightened. I don't know about that. I do. I see it every day. That night, Martha lay in bed thinking about Nora's words, about being looked at like she was the best thing in the room. She'd spent so long believing she was the worst thing, the embarrassment, the burden, the woman people crossed the street to avoid. But here, in this house, with this family, she was wanted. Not in spite of who she was, but because of it. The thought made her cry. In September, the first letter arrived. It came by courier, a young man who looked nervous delivering it. The envelope was expensive paper, the handwriting elegant. Elias opened it at the dinner table. His face went dark as he read. What is it? Martha asked. Invitation to a county social in Miles City, hosted by Lucian Vale. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? He passed her the letter. It was exactly what he'd said. A formal invitation to a dinner and dance hosted by Mr. Lucian Vale at the Grand Hotel. All prominent families in the county were invited, including Mr. and Mrs. Elias Ward. It's a trap, Nora said. Has to be. Maybe. Or maybe he's accepted defeat and this is his way of making peace. Elias didn't sound convinced. We shouldn't go, Martha said. If we don't, it looks like we're afraid of him. Aren't we? Maybe. But I'm tired of letting him control our lives. Elias looked at her. What do you think? Martha thought about Red Hollow, about walking through town with her head down, trying to be invisible, about the courthouse and Ruth Garrett's vicious words. I think we go, she said, together, and we show him we're not afraid anymore. The social was in 2 weeks. Martha had nothing to wear. Her 2 dresses were work clothes, worn and patched. But Nora remembered her mother's trunk in the attic. Mother was bigger than most women, she said. Not as big as you, but close. Maybe we can alter something. They spent 3 days going through Caroline's clothes. Finally, they found a dress that might work. Deep blue silk with black trim, elegant but not showy. Martha tried it on. It was tight across the bust and hips, but Nora was clever with a needle. She let out seams, adjusted the waist, added panels of matching fabric she found in the trunk. When it was done, Martha looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized what she saw. She looked like someone's wife, like someone who mattered. You're beautiful, Elsie said quietly. Martha's eyes burned. Thank you, sweetheart. The night of the social, they rode to Miles City in the wagon. Elias wore his only suit, cleaned and pressed. Martha wore Caroline's altered dress and tried not to think about how everyone would stare. The Grand Hotel was the finest building in Miles City, 3 stories of red brick with a ballroom that could hold 200 people. Carriages lined the street. Well-dressed couples streamed through the doors. Martha's stomach churned. We can still leave, Elias said. No, we're here. We're going in. They entered together. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, polished floors, tables laden with food, and people. So many people, all dressed in their finest, all turning to stare as Martha and Elias appeared in the doorway. The whispers started immediately. Is that Martha Reed? I heard she married Ward. Desperation makes people do strange things. Look at the size of her in that dress. Martha's face burned. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, but Elias took her arm. Head up. You belong here as much as any of them. They moved into the crowd. People parted around them like water around a stone. And then Vale was there. He looked immaculate in a black suit, his hair perfectly arranged. His smile was all teeth. "Mr. and Mrs. Ward, how wonderful you could make it." "Vale," Elias said coldly, "I'm so glad you came. I wanted to personally congratulate you on your victory." He looked at Martha. "And your marriage? How unexpected." "Is there a point to this?" Martha asked. "Just hospitality. After all, we're all neighbors here, all part of the same community. It would be a shame to let our little disagreement spoil that. You tried to destroy our family. I tried to acquire property. Business, as I said. But that's behind us now." Vale gestured to the ballroom. "Please, enjoy the evening. Dance, eat, celebrate. You've earned it." He walked away, leaving them standing there. "I don't trust him," Elias muttered. "Neither do I. But we're here now. Might as well see what he's up to." They stayed. Martha endured the stares, the whispers, the fake smiles from women who'd shunned her in Red Hollow. She held her head high and refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. And then, halfway through the evening, Vale stood up and called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have a moment of your time." The room quieted. All eyes turned to him. "I want to take this opportunity to address some unpleasantness that occurred earlier this year. As many of you know, I was involved in a legal dispute with Mr. Elias Ward's over his ranch property." Martha's blood ran cold. "I want to publicly acknowledge that I was in the wrong," Vale continued. "I allowed business interests to cloud my judgment, and I acted in ways that were harmful to a good family. For that, I apologize." Stunned silence. "Furthermore," Vale said, "I want to announce that I'm donating $10,000 to the county to establish a fund for struggling ranchers and farmers. No one should face foreclosure without having every possible avenue for assistance explored first." Applause rippled through the room. Martha stared. This couldn't be real. Vale didn't apologize, didn't give money away without expecting something in return. "And finally," Vale said, looking directly at Martha and Elias, "I want to toast Mr. and Mrs. Ward to their perseverance, their love for their family, and their unwillingness to give up even when the odds were against them. They're an example to us all." He raised his glass. The room followed suit. "To the Wards!" "To the Wards!" the crowd echoed. Elias and Martha stood frozen as 200 people toasted them. When the applause died down, Vale came over. "I meant every word," he said quietly. "You taught me something, Mr. Ward, about what matters, about what's worth fighting for." He looked at Martha. "And you, Mrs. Ward, you showed me that strength comes in forms I wasn't wise enough to recognize." "Why are you doing this?" Martha asked. "Because I'm tired of fighting, tired of being the villain." Vale's smile was sad. "Sometimes losing teaches you more than winning ever could." He walked away. Martha and Elias looked at each other. "Did that just happen?" she asked. "I think so." "Do we believe it?" "I don't know, but right now, I don't care." Elias held out his hand. "Dance with me." "I don't know how." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They moved on to the dance floor. The music started. A waltz, slow and sweet. Elias put his hand on her waist. Martha put hers on his shoulder. They moved clumsily, stepping on each other's feet, completely out of rhythm with the music. And Martha laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in years. "We're terrible at this," she said. "Absolutely awful. People are staring. Let them." They danced until the song ended, and when they walked off the floor, people were smiling instead of whispering. It was the strangest thing Martha had ever experienced. The seasons turned. Fall came, then winter again. The ranch survived a brutal January, lost 2 cattle to wolves, fixed the barn roof when it collapsed under heavy snow. Vale kept his word. The fund he'd established helped 3 families avoid foreclosure. His lawyer never came back to town. And gradually the county stopped talking about the great battle between Vale and the Wards. Martha and Elias stopped sleeping in separate rooms. It happened gradually, a pattern of him falling asleep in her room after talking late into the night, or her waking up in his bed after they'd stayed up watching a storm. One morning, Nora found them asleep together and just smiled. "About time," she said. Elsie had started reading aloud every evening. She loved old stories, fairy tales. Her voice was still quiet, still uncertain, but it was there. "Once upon a time," she read one night, There was a woman who everyone said was too different to ever be loved. Martha looked up from her mending. What story is that? Elsie showed her the book. It was one Martha had never seen, old, handmade, the pages covered in careful handwriting, Caroline's handwriting. Mother wrote stories, Nora said quietly. For us. She never finished most of them.
Martha looked at the page Elsie was reading, the story of a woman who was too tall, too loud, too much of everything, who found a family that loved her anyway. Your mother knew, Martha said. Knew what? That the people who seem too different, too difficult, too much, those are often the ones worth keeping. 2 years later, Nora left for teaching school in Helena. She wrote every week long letters full of ideas and dreams and plans to come back and start a school in the county. Elsie grew tall and strong, her voice confident now. She helped run the ranch, worked beside her father and Martha like she'd been born to it. And Martha and Elias grew into their marriage. Not perfectly. They still fought about money and work and how to fix the eternal problems of ranch life. But they grew together, two broken people who'd somehow made something whole. One evening, 5 years after the hearing, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. You ever regret it? Elias asked. Coming here? Marrying me? Martha thought about Red Hollow, about the woman who'd collapsed in the snow, convinced she had nothing left to live for. No, she said. Not once. Even though it was hard? Because it was hard, easy things never saved anyone. Elias took her hand. I love you. It was the first time he'd said it, the first time either of them had. Martha's throat closed. I love you too. They sat in silence, watching the light fade over the mountains. The years continued to pass. More winters, more springs. The ranch prospered, then struggled, then prospered again. Elsie grew into a young woman who could shoe a horse and balance a ledger and read poetry with equal skill. Nora came back with her teaching certificate and started a school in Red Hollow, teaching children whose parents had once mocked Martha. Vale died in his sleep when Martha was 53. She went to the funeral, stood in the back. She didn't cry for him, but she didn't hate him either. He'd been a man like any other, capable of cruelty, capable of change. Ruth Garrett and Susan Miller both tried to apologize to Martha over the years. She accepted their words but kept her distance. Some wounds heal, but that doesn't mean you have to let the people who caused them back into your life. When Martha was 67, Elias got sick. Something in his lungs, the doctor said. Same thing that had killed Samuel in the end. He died on a Tuesday morning in March, holding Martha's hand, surrounded by his daughters and grandchildren he'd never expected to have. Martha buried him next to Caroline on the hill, overlooking the ranch. She thought she'd fall apart, thought losing him would break her the way losing Samuel had. But she'd learned something in the decades between. Grief didn't have to destroy you. It could just be a weight you carried, heavy but bearable, alongside everything else. She kept running the ranch. Elsie helped, and Nora's eldest son came to work the land. The Ward family grew and spread, roots going deep into that mountain valley. And Martha lived. Fully, fiercely, until her body finally gave out 23 years after Elias died. She died in the kitchen she'd spent decades working in. Died surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who'd all heard the stories about how she'd come to the ranch with nothing and saved everything. They buried her next to Elias and Caroline, 3 stones in a row on that hillside. Martha's was simple, just her name and dates and one line she'd requested before she died. She was the one who stayed. The valley mourned her, not just the family, but the whole county. Even people who'd never met her came to pay respects to the woman who'd survived everything and refused to quit. Because that's what Martha's life had taught them all. That the world will try to break you. Will tell you you're too much or not enough. Will throw you away like you don't matter. But you can survive it. You can find people who see your worth. You can build something beautiful out of the wreckage. You just have to be stubborn enough to stay. Years later, when Elsie was old and her own children were grown, she'd tell them about Martha, about the woman who'd come to their ranch when Elsie was too broken to speak. She saved us, Elsie would say, not because she was perfect, not because she had all the answers, but because when everyone else walked away, she stayed. And staying, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, that's the bravest thing anyone can do. And somewhere in that mountain valley, in the house Martha had helped build into a home, in the family she'd helped save, her story lived on. Not as a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but as something better, something real. A reminder that the people the world throws away are often the ones strong enough to save it.